Welcome onto this edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. Today we are talking all things pain in runners over 50. We're going to talk about what pain is, the types of pain you get, and how aging affects it. We're going to give you some actionable advice. I'll try and put my teeth back in for this one. Some actionable advice on how to handle pain when it starts. And then we're also going to talk about some long-term strategies for reducing pain and making sure you are able to train sustainably. My name is Brad Nadauld. We've got the coach Lindsey Parry with us once again. Lindsey, nice to touch base. All well, your side of the world?
Yeah, pretty good. I think I'm starting to fall into this exact category myself as I approach 48 rapidly. So not quite at the fast beyond 50 yet, but I'm getting there. Been running since I was 5 years old, so I feel like this is me. I'm talking to myself.
Yeah, it's quite funny, Lindsey, because I'm training for a couple of ultras. I'm actually running my first ultra in, I think, close on 13 years, maybe 12 years. This coming weekend. So, not this weekend, next weekend. Geez, nearly gave myself heart failure there thinking it was this weekend, but in just under 2 weeks from now. And it's funny, like in the build up to this, have been struggling with a bit of pain, but touch wood, we seem to be in good shape. I have been doing a lot of the right things, which we are going to talk about today. But yeah, it is amazing once you start, you almost feel like it's normal, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Because sometimes we say to ourselves, "Oh, you know what? Pain comes with the territory as we get older." But is this really true? And I think that's what we're going to be covering. We're going to be diving into what pain really means for runners over 50, and how you know when to stop, what's normal, what's not, and how to keep running without making the pain worse. Lindsey, let's dive straight into things. And this is one of our deep dive episodes, so I really want to go deep on this if we can. And I think let's talk about definitions, because often we talk about being a little bit stiff or a little bit sore, but what is the difference between like soreness, pain, and full-blown injury?
Yeah, so that is the magic question, and we need to take note of all pain, okay? Pain, discomfort. We really need to take note of all of it and do something about it. We don't want to ignore any pain or discomfort. And, I get from runners so many times when I ask them, how sore were you after a race? And no, I was totally fine. And as we unpack more, it'll come out that no, I only had the normal stiffness. Like that's still pain. So I think that's for me one of the most important parts is that we have to acknowledge all types of pain and discomfort, because we've got to know what they mean, and then they've all got different levels of intervention, but they all require some intervention, otherwise they're going to lead to other problems. So when we talk about stiffness, that is pain, delayed onset of muscular soreness. So that's the soreness that we will typically get in muscles, sometimes in tendons and ligaments, but predominantly in muscles. We will get that delayed onset muscular soreness, and that's essentially some overreach. Okay, that means we've worked the muscles harder than they have worked in whatever the period of time is, and we have to respond to that. Okay, so that's not an injury, Brad, but if we ignore it, that can easily lead to an injury, because what we get associated with that muscle soreness is a tightening up of the muscle. So that soreness is, in as simple a definite explanation as I can give, is bleeding in the cells of the muscles. Okay, so it's technically not correct, but that's what it is. So there is a buildup of fluid in the actual muscle fibers and around the muscle fibers. And because there's not a lot of space there, that's why we feel that pain. So those things are swollen. That is inflammation. And when they swell, they also tighten up. So now we are tight and sore, and there's damage there. So now if we're going to go and do the activity that we did to get sore, that is going to potentially lead to some chronic buildup of scar tissuing, reducing the long-term flexibility of muscles. It's going to delay the repair of those muscles, potentially damage them more, and those tiny little micro tears might then develop into something else. So stiffness, soreness needs a response. Okay, we're going to unpack what that means later. Right now, we just want to get through what the different types of soreness are. Okay, now you will get other types of pain and discomfort. The kind of chronic pain and discomfort that we tend to start feeling as we get older. When you wake up in the morning, your ankles are a bit tight and sore, your knees are a bit tight and sore, your lower back is a little bit tight and sore. So those are things that are much more closely associated to as we get older, and as our tendons and muscles, etc., start to stiffen up a little bit. Some of it in response to exercise, some of it in response to just getting older. And ironically, if we stop moving, those type of aches and pains actually come earlier. They are more severe. They're harder to deal with. Okay, so that's kind of category number 2. And obviously, we have to modify what we're doing. But essentially, a lot of what we try to do at Coach Parry is centered around minimizing the impact of that. And then, Brad, we roll into the injury, chronic or acute. Acute, much easier because that's kind of a pulled muscle, a pulled tendon, a pulled ligament. And those are normally really sore. You literally feel them happen. They generally stop you short. And even if they are really minor, and after that initial shock of the pain, we can sometimes carry on moving afterwards. And then they might flare up later or whatever, but it becomes just a minor little niggle in the background. That's still acute, and that one's easy. That one needs rest plus treatment, because we've got to do some kind of treatment. There's very few injuries that will just heal properly with only rest. Okay, so acute injuries are obvious. You feel them happen, and generally they limit your ability to move. And then we move more into the kind of chronic, which is often when we ignore any of the sort of delayed onset of muscle soreness, or if we just ignore the aches and pains and we kind of carry on, and then you get a sore Achilles, for example, and that's kind of debilitating. But often, once we get moving, those are the kind of things that feel, oh, it's not so bad when we are moving. Okay, so and then they may come back straight after exercise. They may progressively get worse or stay the same. But now I'm kind of jumping into the territory of kind of where we want to go next about what to do with things, or about things. But that kind of gives you this scale of aches and pains, right from normal pain in response to exercise that just needs a little bit of management coming out of it, into the kind of aches and pains that are associated with getting old, your arthritis-y type of pains, although that's a different category of chronic and a slightly different management, and then into that acute and chronic injury realm.
Cool, Lindsey. Before we dive into sort of like the sort of ways to manage the different types of pain, I think it's probably important to look at sort of like worst case scenario. Like, what are the red flags that should stop running immediately? Because often I think as runners we go, well, you know, this little bit sore, I'm gonna go out, do an easy 2 or 3 miles just to see what it's like, and sometimes we do more damage. But like, if you're working with someone and they're in pain, like, when do you tell them, you know what, no running, you need to stop until this is sorted?
Yeah, so with DOMs, it's easy. While we have DOMs, I don't like to do any running. I'm happy with sort of mobility and light strength training. I'm very happy with swimming. I'm very happy with cycling. I'm very happy with elliptical. So essentially, any non-impact weight-bearing forms of exercise are fine, probably good, and they probably speed up the healing process. So that's where I would modify from pure stiffness or DOMS, a response to having slightly overdone it. Okay, moving into the kind of just general achy, painy, wake up in the morning, need to walk around before everything gets oiled up again and going. Carry on exercising. So that's not a sign for stopping. You can carry on with normal exercise. We would just modify intensity and frequency. Okay, so that would be there. Now, when we move into the chronic and acute, that's kind of the crux of your question: is how do I decide whether doing exercise, be it running or cross training or any other form of exercise, should be done while I am injured? Okay, and so with that, I've kind of got a 3-tiered system that I try and look at. So in answer to your question, is it okay to go out and test the injury? Okay. The answer to that question is yes, provided that you are not in pain walking. So if you have to modify your walking because it's sore enough, then you've been silly running, but you could try one of the non-impact forms of exercise. And then if you can walk okay and it bothers you a little bit when you run, there are 3 steps to look at. Okay, the first step is when I'm running, early in that run, we're talking first 5 to 6 minutes of the run, is there a progression in discomfort? If the answer to that question is yes, that's it. That's your first step. We're not going to run. That is an indicator that this is not an injury that's going to get better with exercise. It's going to get worse. So we will stop. Okay. So if you start running and that either improves or best case scenario, it really just stays the same, then we are okay. Okay. So that's your first kind of decision point. Your next decision point is, right, now once I'm over that 5 or 6 minutes, is there a point at which that pain will increase? So something like iliotibial band friction syndrome is like a classic example of this, is that the nature of the injury means that you might be able to do 35 to 40 minutes pain-free, and then there's an escalation of pain. As soon as you get to that escalation point, you stop. With an injury like iliotibial band friction syndrome, if we know it comes at 35 minutes, we'll exercise at 30 minutes for a week, week and a half. Doing the rehabilitation exercises, then push up to 30 to 35 minutes, always staying below that thing. And so you can exercise and improve with that one. Okay. If there's no escalation for however long, that's normally a good sign. And then we get into number 3. And this is actually quite a common one for people to get into. And I often hear from people, I don't know what the issue is, but running is not sore at all. And I'll tell you, that's something that I have been dealing with now for the past little bit. And that is that the actual act of running does not hurt at all. So you don't think that it's doing anything. However, on a day-to-day basis, there is an escalation and progression in pain. And that is a clear sign that running is having an effect, even if you're not feeling it while you are doing it. And so then we need to pull back on the running. I'm currently doing pretty much 30 minutes at a time, doing the strength training. And finally, there's this real drop in the discomfort in my knee as time goes on. So essentially, to sum up everything that I've said, is what you're trying to do is to track any escalation and see at which point in the chain that escalation is, and modify exercise in a way that that escalation reverses. And we either get better, sometimes it's just a plateau, and that is something that sometimes we need to learn to deal with as we're getting older. But there must be, at minimum, no progression of that to be able to continue with current training load.
Yeah, I almost feel like we need to take a step back, Ellen. Obviously, that's we're talking about someone who has pain already, like when you stop. But let's talk about when it actually happens, like the first instance where all of a sudden you feel pain. Like, what's the first step you should be taking, whether it's during a run, all of a sudden you feel pain, or after a run? What's the best course of action to sort of figure out how bad this actually is?
This episode of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast is brought to you by Active Forever. You love to run, but recovery just doesn't happen as fast as it used to. That's where Recover Plus Muscle Repair comes in. Designed for runners over 50, it includes whey protein for muscle repair, creatine for strength, and L-glutamine to fight soreness so you bounce back quicker and run pain-free. Fuel your recovery the right way. Head over to Get Active Forever and use the coupon code FAST to get 10% off your first order. That's getactiveforever.com.
Yeah, so that's also a really fair question. And so any pain that happens while you're running, that's stop. deceased and desist. Okay, so we stop running, we head back home, we put some ice on the affected area, put compression on the affected area, and then when you do get a moment, you get your leg above your hips so that gravity can kind of drain that limb. And all three of those things are steps to reduce the amount of inflammation. Okay, so our body is prone to over exaggerate. Something gets hurt, big blow up of inflammation, and then the body heals itself and we carry on going. So ice, compression, elevation, all three of those things just reduce the exaggeration of that inflammation. And so they don't stop the body's ability to heal. And then that gives us a good opportunity to say, okay, well, how do I feel the next day? And then that will be into what we've just, sorry, that I jumped ahead with and unpacked first. It's like, what's that escalation? What's that progression like? Is there progression? If there's progression, treatment. Okay, so once you've felt pain, you've done ice, rest, ice, compression, elevation. If it hasn't healed up in 48 to 72 hours, treatment. Okay, so that's pretty much how you follow those guidelines. If you follow those guidelines, typically 48 hours to a week. 48 hours is normally, if you feel a twinge, stop, rest, ice, compression, elevation, do those things. Generally, we're talking 2 days and you can get back to activity. Ignore it, and we may go into this chronic phase. But if it's still not better after 48 hours, it means we've done something a little bit more significant. Go and get treatment. Go and see a physiotherapist.
Yeah, Lindsey, one thing I love about what we do here at Coach Parry is it gives people the opportunity, because I think a lot of people, you feel a twinge or tweak while you're running, and then you get home and then you jump on Google and you start asking questions about, and I laugh because I had this conversation with you last week where you were talking about your knee that you're struggling with, and you said you had your physiology textbook out there and you were looking at anatomy and looking to see and pressing on your knee. Most people don't have that luxury where you have an anatomy textbook and you can try and figure it out yourself. And but for most people, we go home, we have a sore ankle or a sore calf muscle, we jump on Google, or even worse, we jump on Facebook and start asking questions, and then everybody just chimes in with advice. No one actually knows what the problem is, but they're telling you to do all sorts of stuff. And what I love about what we do at Coach Parry is because you get access to our team of coaches, you can ask that question, they can ask a couple of clarifying questions, and you can get sort of help where you can go, okay, cool, you need to rest, or you need to, it's not too serious, or you need to go and get help, as you said, like with a physiotherapist as an example. But let's talk a little bit about sort of cross-training. You mentioned like if you have DOMs as an example, like swimming's great or cycling's great. But when it comes to pain, how helpful is cross-training in the process of managing pain, and maybe even walking? Let me throw walking in there too as a form of cross-training. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts on cross-training and including walking when you are battling with some pain.
Yeah, so maybe let's just also unpack a little bit why you shouldn't just train through pain. Okay, so every time you have pain, that's a signal that goes to your brain, and because your brain is effectively trying to fix that area, it starts to come up with strategies to stop you from exercising. Okay, and one of the biggest strategies that it uses is called inhibition. So it actually inhibits signals to the muscles that you need for the movement in the affected area. Okay? And that's often why we pick up compensatory injuries when we just carry on going, is because I've hurt my knee. So that means hamstrings, quads, glutes, they stop firing properly. Now, obviously, they will still work, because if they didn't work, you'd collapse in a heap. Although maybe that's where the brain will evolve to when it finally realizes that runners will exercise with a cut off limb. But at the moment, what it does, it just means nothing works properly. And that's why often one injury leads to another injury. So why is cross training so useful? It's useful because it takes away that pain cycle. So it stops the signaling of the brain for inhibition of that joint. So now you can exercise and we stop that inhibition cycle. Okay. And then, of course, cross training is a very effective way of maintaining all the health and fitness benefits of exercise. And so if you're worried about losing fitness, cross training is great because it's going to stimulate the heart. It's going to stimulate the aerobic energy system. It's going to ensure that you maintain a good level of fitness so that if you're training towards an event, for example, you don't have to panic about losing fitness because you're not running.
All right, cool. Lindsey, let's talk a little bit about the sort of role of strength training, mobility, warm-ups, like cooling down properly after a run when it comes to sort of managing pain. What are your thoughts on those sort of modalities to assist in pain-free running?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, look, this is one of those things that goes in the investment bracket. So, if we had listened to the advice when we were 20, then perhaps we could have retired when we were 40, So, and this is where the kind of mobility in particular and warming up and stretching post-exercise really goes into the same basket, is that if we knew what we know now when we were 20, we quite possibly could have pushed off this 50 to 60 or 60 to 70 because we would be so much more mobile, because we would be so much stronger. So the good news, of course, is that it's never too late. But just like investing, the longer you leave it to start, the bigger your problems are. So we are now talking specifically in response to pain, essentially, and nothing motivates like actually having a problem to solve. So we're specifically talking to people with a problem to solve. But if anyone's listening to this out of interest, you can do these things to ensure that you don't have a problem to solve, so that you either have to deal with these things much later in life or hopefully not at all. Okay, so to your point, Brad, is that before we go out, particularly to run, but before any activity, before we do strength training, and I'm going to talk about strength training a little bit on its own shortly, but when we're doing cross training, probably not the worst idea to do some mobility just when you get up in the morning. But if you do some gentle mobility, some leg swings, a couple of shallow side lunges, some are they called around the world? It's kind of shown as kind of squat.
World's greatest stretch.
Well, no, the world's greatest stretch is a great one, but I wouldn't jump straight in there. That's when you get into your lunge position and up. No, when you kind of squat down, push your knees apart, reach up to the sky. But yeah, so mobility exercises. Let's not get too stuck in the weeds here, but there's a good couple of mobility exercises and activation exercises you can do. Simply balancing on one leg. So stand close to the wall, especially when it's early morning. You just stand close to the wall so that you can just use it to correct yourself, but simply balancing for 15 to 20 seconds on each leg on its own is a great activation exercise for your glutes and quads, just to get you fired up before you go and do exercise. Gently pushing, standing against the wall and gently pushing outwards with your inside leg. So you're pushing yourself away from the wall, but holding in that position. Awesome exercise for just activating the glutes, which is a brilliant exercise just before we go and run. So some very simple mobility, and we're talking 5 to 7 minutes here before a run, and investing on getting your mobility going and activating all the muscles that you need for your running. So that's the first part, getting your mobility, getting your activation done before exercise sets you up for any little niggles to be massively reduced, because now the body is going to do all the things that it's supposed to be doing and perhaps hasn't been doing, which led you to that particular place. Okay. And then afterwards, to maintain that mobility, to do some dynamic and static stretching so that we can improve that mobility over the short, medium, and long term, because that's going to protect us for much later in life. So I'm going to kind of expand on a theme that my professor at university really hammered into my head during my postgrad studies, which is that when we are young, we need to exercise to be healthy. But as we get older, he used to say we need to get strong so that we can exercise, so that we can get healthy. But I'm going to add mobility into that strength. It's so important that we maintain a range of motion so that we can do the strength properly, so that we can exercise for late into our life, so that we can stay healthy. And that then takes me into the next and very important step, Brad, and that's strength training. Okay. And if you want to maintain pain-free running into your 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s, I saw there was the 1500 meter, no, 800 meters. Sorry, let me not get carried away. The 800 meter world record for 100 plus runners was just broken, 4:45 for 800 meters at 100 years old. If I can do that, I'm all in on that. That's ridiculous. But anyway, but strength training, you've got to do strength training. So the mobility and the activation will allow your muscles to do the job they need to do. The strength training will make them strong enough to do the job they need to do. It'll have performance benefits. It'll have biomechanical benefits. It'll have reduction in injury risk, reduction in pain benefits. But you have to do strength training as you get older if you want to enjoy pain-free or reduced discomfort running.
Yeah, Lindsey, if I can just throw my 2 cents in here as well, because I have been notoriously terrible at doing strength training. Like I would rather gargle with razor blades before I do strength training. Like it is just like I don't enjoy it. But for the last about 18 months, I've been struggling with a bit of a sciatica piriformis weird sort of thing that like it's sore while I run, but doesn't progress. But when I sit after a run, I'm like in agony. Like I can't get comfortable. And in the build up to this ultra that I'm running next weekend, and I'm running another ultra in June, I've like, you know what, I have to do strength training. Like if I want to run those sorts of distances, I'm just being silly not doing it. And I've been pretty consistent, and not for long. This is probably the last sort of like 4 or 5 weeks that I've been doing strength training. All of a sudden, this little niggle has cleared up again, and it's I've got really like my hips are not really sort of that supple. Like I really struggle with some of the hip mobility, but as soon as I'm working on it, all of a sudden this thing's cleared up. My glutes, it's amazing, and that's the only thing that's changed. Like I'm running more mileage, so in theory it should be getting worse because it's like I'm doing more damage if you look at it that way. But the only thing I've added is strength training. It's made a huge difference. So if you're not doing it, definitely start. It is well worth the investment. So I'm just putting that out there as well. Lindsey, then let's just touch on when it comes to pain, and I don't know if this does play a difference, like recovery modalities. I know we've done like a real big deep dive on like nutrition and sleep and that sort of stuff. Does that sort of stuff assist with pain management or not really?
Absolutely. I mean, again, as we get older, if we're not eating properly, we're not providing the building blocks for the recovery to happen, then obviously the repair job that the body's going to do is going to be like haphazard patchwork of work. And so that's going to weaken the structures, weaken the system, or delay the recovery, one of the two. So absolutely, nutrition makes a massive difference to this. And one of the issues that we get as we get older is that there is a loss of appetite. And so it can be a little bit harder to get in all the nutrition that you need. And particularly in your 50s and early 60s, that's often just about the most busy you are in your career. And so we often get into the trap of not eating properly just on time. We skip meals, we get a little bit lazy, perhaps lots of entertaining, depending on the role that you're playing. So we often don't eat healthy in the evenings while we are entertaining and that sort of thing. And so as we get older, it may become necessary to look at supplementation, for example, a whey protein, a creatine, collagen, particularly if you are L-glutamine and collagen, if you are always feeling a little bit of joint discomfort, that like kind of frozen joints and stiffness when you wake up in the morning, and you can get what you need from food, okay? But if you're not and you're struggling and you're inconsistent with your eating, it might be a good idea to then go and have a look at some supplements and so on. Then things like massage and foam rolling, getting into some compression socks. These things make a huge difference. Sleep is so important. But again, another thing that starts to go as we get older is a difficulty in sleeping. And we've done a huge deep dive on sleep that people can go and listen to, because as we get older, we perhaps can't sleep as long as we need to, but we can do a whole lot of things that we can just try and improve the quality of our sleep so that we sleep better at night, and that helps with the recovery. And I think in summary, Brad, is if we can recover better, we are definitely going to suffer less from pain and discomfort when we exercise as we get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lindsey, you did mention supplements. We do have a range of supplements that we've created here at Coach Parry called Active Forever. If you do want to check those out, there is a link in the description of this podcast. You can also click straight through, if you're watching this on YouTube, to those recovery products that Lindsey did mention. There is some whey protein. We've got L-glutamine, all of those sorts of stuff. So definitely go and check that out. And then, Lindsey, let's talk about like the long-term strategies to just sort of run smarter, not necessarily harder as we get older. And I think one of the ways to do this is to actually track how we're feeling. How would you suggest runners sort of like track or log pain so that they're able to make better decisions going forward?
Yeah, so again, we want to take note and be responsive to all discomfort and pain, but kind of giving yourself, most humans are pretty good at giving themselves a little bit of a weighting. So if you kind of just take note every day of how you're feeling, and you rate your discomfort / pain on a scale of 1 to 10, I reckon anything in the 1 to 3 bracket there's probably a degree of normalness to that as we get older, but we can get that to 0 or 1. So if you're in the 1 to 3, you can kind of carry on with training. We are going to modify, and I'm going to get to that shortly, because as we get to 50, 60 and beyond, it's very good. It's a very good idea to modify so that we avoid getting to this point at all. And when we're in this point, the modifications will be quite similar anyway. In your 3 to 6 range, I would go, right, let me modify my exercise by doing something else, strength training or cross training. And in the 6+ bracket, we definitely shouldn't be running. We probably should just rest outright for a day or two and try and get into the 3 to 6 so that we can then do some cross training. Okay. Now, in terms of modifying, so that we can either reduce the risk of getting into this place, or if we're in this place, to try and get out of this place of this constantly running in some form of discomfort or pain. And that is to modify our exercise. So typically, we deal with people that run between 5 and 7 days a week. Okay, that's the very typical for most runners, is to run that much. And as we get into our 50s, but particularly into our 60s, that is just way too much running. And so we need to both decrease volume and we need to decrease the frequency. And so typically 4 days a week of running is plenty of running to continue to improve our running, particularly if we pull out the pain and discomfort. Because if we pull out the pain and discomfort, we take away that inhibitory cycle and our running can start to improve again. it also then gives us the bandwidth, the time, the energy to be able to then add in the strength training, which is going to make a bigger difference to improving your running than running more will. And once we get to that point of we can run 4 days a week, we can do the strength training a week, we're coping, we've got more time to train, we've got an inclination that we would like to train more, then cross training becomes so important in 50s and 60s. You will get, again, vastly more or better improvements by doing cross training than rather than adding more running back in the mix and then kicking off that pain cycle again. Okay, so we'll start by reducing the amount of running and the volume of the running, add in the strength training, and then bring in cross training. And those are the three kind of modifications that will have the biggest impact on your pain management as you get older, but also help you to improve again in the short term.
Yeah, Lindsey, you've got a very cool story about, and it's really close to home, about your dad cutting back the sort of frequency that he was running. And I know we've told this story lots, but I don't think we've actually told the story on this podcast. So I don't know if you want to share what was happening with your dad, like when in his 50s, your dad's in his 70s now, still running incredibly well. But and just to give some backstory, your dad in his prime was a phenomenal runner. I mean, like 220 odd marathoner, like just like really, really, really good. But when he turned 50, things started going a little bit south. Tell us the story and then how things turned around.
Yeah, and I'll give you an update on the story because it's like history repeated itself now in my dad's 70s. But yeah, so in the 50s, of course, the dramatic part of that story, quite simply, is I was reasonably newly qualified. I was just starting my own journey in this rehabilitation space and fixing people who were injured. And obviously, my father paid for the vast majority of my studies, my accommodation. So, I mean, he spent literally hundreds of thousands on this education, but was never interested in listening to anything that I had to say. So, we were running one day, literally, and my father was complaining about a sore knee. And I was like, Dad, you know what? You're not interested in any of my advice, so I'm not interested in listening to any of your problems. So if you want to tell me about your problems, then listen to something that I've got to say. And I think that was maybe just rude enough to get through. And so he's like, okay, well, what do you suggest I do? And I was like, well, firstly, stop running every day, because he was running 7 days a week. Stop running in pain every single day.
I'm gonna ask you to take a little bit back, because there's a funny story about your dad running every single day, and this was when he was like racing. So like, tell us the story about when he went to the doctor after Comrades the 1 year because he was in pain.
Yeah, so I mean, we grew up in a small town, so everybody knows everybody. And my dad went, he ran Comrades, and then climbed in his car and drove 500 kilometers, like what's that, 300 miles, drove home to, after running 50 miles, 89 kilometers. When he got home, my mother had to cut his tracksuit pants off because his leg had swollen so much we couldn't get his tracksuit pants off him, because he hurt his leg at about 20 miles, just short of a marathon. He hurt his leg, and well, he just thought he'd carry on and do another 30 miles on his sore leg, because it was sore, but I could run. Okay, so that's my dad. Okay. And so he went to the doctor, and the doctor checked everything out, and the doctor was like, it has swollen because you ran so far in it when it was sore. But he didn't say any of that out loud. He told my dad, nope, you've pulled whatever, and stuck him in a cast for 3 weeks. And then when my dad went back, so they cut the cast off and told my dad, actually, it wasn't serious. You didn't need a cast, but I knew that if I didn't put a cast on, you would try and run. So this was how I made sure you didn't run for 2 weeks. Okay. So that was my dad. So anyway, I convinced him that that's just not. And we cut back to 4 days a week. And over the next 7 years, he carried on improving, getting faster and faster and faster. So we're talking about like from around 53, 54 years old to 60 years old. He got faster and faster and faster until when he turned 60, he started running the times that he last ran as a 50-year-old. And I've got a cool photo that I normally share with this, which was me running in a race when he was 60 where he literally ran to the second, the same time he ran when he won that race as a 50-year-old. So you can imagine he won it by quite a long way when he was won his age group, by quite a long way as a 6-year-old. And then Brad, like literally exactly the same thing happened now in his 70s. He'd started to fall a fair bit. And when he was 73-ish, I was like, Dad, are you still doing strength training? And then he confessed he'd gotten lazy about his strength training. He was still only running. In fact, he wasn't only running 4 days a week. He'd also increased the frequency of running because he was running with a bunch of much younger runners, and he'd just gotten sucked back in. So he'd slowly pushed his frequency up, and he'd dropped his strength training off. And now we fast forward 2 years. He went an entire calendar year without a fall. Okay. He promises me he'll never stop doing strength again, because he said it's like literally the more strength that he's doing, just the more stable he feels. And when he does catch something, he's actually strong enough to keep himself off the ground. And then he ran a half marathon a couple of weeks ago, actually, and he ran the same time to the second that he last ran when he was 67 or 68. And it's another one of those races that he runs every year. And so cutting back his training, his running again, increasing his strength training again. Now over this 5-year period, we've gotten him faster again. And so now he's 75 and running like an hour 50 for a half marathon again.
Yeah, that's so cool, Lindsey. What a great story. And for people who've been sort of following what we do here, Coach Parry, for a while, that I think they might think that your dad's a bit of a phantom, because we never actually feature him in anything. We talk about him a lot, but we don't actually have him on the YouTube channel. The good news is this coming Thursday, there's actually a video coming out on our YouTube channel that's going to have your dad in it. So if you want to see what Lindsey's dad, Trevor Parry, looks like and the sort of stuff that he's doing, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you don't miss that video that's coming out on Thursday. It's a pretty cool video about mobility for over 50s runners. Yeah, Lindsey's dad features in that one quite heavily, so make sure you watch that, Lindsey. And I think that ties nicely into my sort of next question, which sort of ties this all up in a bow, essentially, and that's mindset when it comes to running and pain, particularly in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, because we often don't want to feel like we are giving up. So like we push the limit, as like it's almost like if you want to get the results, you've got to push harder. But it is a mindset thing, and sometimes sort of letting go is actually the best thing you can do, because you are going to get better by doing that. So talk a little bit about the sort of mindset that you need to have, or the mindset shift that you need to make to keep running strong without ignoring what's actually going on in your body.
No, absolutely, Brad, because the reality here is that almost all the people we come into contact with, whether they are restarting running or whether they have always run, so many of the people that we deal with are people that have run. And runners, by their very nature, have typically been all about getting better and improving. And so like I really feel like I can literally speak to this particular pain point with personal authority, because that's literally exactly where I find myself now. You know, I'm 10, 15 years beyond my PBs, and only very recently have pretty much accepted that I'm unlikely to run PBs over any distance. Okay. And that has been difficult to deal with. And in the process of dealing that, I've repeatedly had to have this same conversation with myself. And that is to remind myself that harder isn't going to close the gap. And I do feel like there was a time and a place for I need to train harder to get results, but we get stuck in that thinking. You know, if I work harder than my opposition, I'm going to be better than my opposition. If I want to beat the last year's version of myself, I've got to try hard, I've got to do more, I've got to work harder. And so that is a pervasive mindset in the vast majority of the people that we run with. And so we've got to change that mindset, because firstly, the harder is going to make us slower faster. It's going to most likely get us injured faster. It's going to get us to the point where we're running in pain all the time faster. And so we've got to change that mindset, because even if we are going to continue getting slower as we get older, we can reduce that slowing down massively and actually get better in the short term, at least, by training smarter. And that's the key here. So as we get older, we have to train smarter. And training smarter means that we have to accept where we are in our running career and do something about it. And that doing something about it is reducing the volume of our training. It is reducing the frequency of our training. It is adapting how we train by adding strength training and by doing the cross training. And that mind shift is the critical ingredient, because if we do those things, we reduce our pain, we reduce our risk of getting the pain, we reduce and often reverse the side effects of age by doing something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Lindsey. And I think that the three things that I've taken out of this podcast is that pain isn't something to ignore. It's something that you shouldn't fear. Like it happens, but if you ignore it, it gets worse. I think the goal is not to be tougher, it's to be smarter. Like we need to train much smarter than what we are. And listening to your body is a strength. It's not a weakness. Like you've just got to know what's going on inside and deal with it. Like the longer you ignore it, the worse it gets. So hopefully that is helpful. If you do want to see how smart runners train, Lindsey and I are hosting a Fast to Be on 50 masterclass that you can join us for. It's about 90 minutes long, full Q&A. Definitely come check it out. I'll pop the link in the description to this podcast as well. It is in the description of the YouTube video too. Click through, come and join us. We'll definitely you'll definitely learn a thing or two, and hopefully we can help you run faster into your 50s, 60s, and 70s. Lindsey, as always, I love doing these podcasts. Thank you very much for listening and downloading. The amazing thing is it is growing like incredibly. I'm still amazed that I think probably only about 30% of the people who listen to this podcast actually subscribe to it, according to our YouTube analytics. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, please do, because you are going to miss out on some of them as we publish them too. So until next time, from the two of us, it's cheers.